Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Prawn Provencale. That's right, this easy appetizer was inspired by the upcoming Academy Awards, because it's gatherings like that where we want to feature our fanciest hors d'oeuvres. Sure, chips and dips are fine for the Super Bowl, but when George Clooney's accepting the award for Best Jawline in a musical or comedy, we're going to want something a little higher end. And not only are these delicious and kind of fancy looking, they are very easy to make and require prepping just 2 components. Of course, one of those components has 10 ingredients, but still, as you're about to see, pretty easy. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with our garlic herb breadcrumb mixture. And I'm going to do that by transferring some chopped garlic into a mortar, followed by a nice big pinch of kosher salt. We are also going to toss in a pinch of dry oregano, as well as a little pinch of dry thyme. So this mixture is going to feature both dried and fresh herbs. Well, actually fresh herb. Because at this point, I'm also going to toss in a little bit of freshly chopped Italian parsley. And we're actually going to add most of that at the end of this procedure. But I do like to add a little bit here when we smash our garlic to add a little bit of coloration. And then what we'll do before we add our olive oil is grind and smash that garlic down to a paste, which is going to take you a minute or two. And then what we'll do once that mixture has been smashed and mashed to our satisfaction is go ahead and add our olive oil, and then we'll give that a mix for about a minute to infuse that oil with all that goodness. And by the way, if you don't have one of these, well, you really should get one. But if you don't have one currently, you can do this in a blender. You're just not going to extract the same flavor as you do in the mortar. And then what we'll do once our garlic herb oil mixture is set is transfer that into our breadcrumbs. Just good old-fashioned plain dry breadcrumbs. And then once that's transferred in, we'll go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients, which will include some more salt, some freshly ground black pepper, and a little bit of cayenne, just because. We can also add the rest of our freshly chopped parsley. And then last but not least, we'll do a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And please use the real stuff. It goes by the name Parmigiano Reggiano. And then once we have everything together, we'll take a fork and give it a mix. And by the way, as usual, this is a technique, not necessarily a recipe. So if you want to tweak this mixture with different herbs and spices, go ahead. You are, after all, the RuPaul of your Prawn Provencale. So you go ahead and add whatever you think will make this more fabulous. But anyway, we'll give this a mix with the fork. We also need to check to make sure we have enough oil. So what I like to do is give it a mix and then kind of feel it with my fingers. And if it feels a little bit dry, which this did, we'll simply drizzle in a little more olive oil and give it another mix until we think it's perfect. And right here is exactly what we're shooting for. Okay, if we press some of this onto a finger, it will stick. So that's looking good right there. And then what we'll do once that's done is set it aside and move on to the prawns, which are actually most likely shrimp. So I'll cover this very briefly on the blog post. But to make a long story short, culinarily speaking, prawns and shrimp are the same thing, and we're simply calling them prawns here for the alliteration. And what we're going to need to do to prep these is remove the shell, but not the tail. So what some people like to do to play it safe is to remove that piece of shell just below the tail. And then once that's separated, they'll continue on, moving down the shrimp, removing the rest of the shell. So that's one way, and while that does take a little longer, it is kind of safe because you're less likely to accidentally pull off the tail. But here's another way that's a little faster, and I think I prefer it, but it is a little more dangerous. And that's to use your thumb to scrape down across the legs, and then we'll go the other direction, removing the shell from the thick part up to the tail. So this is a little faster, but you got to be careful when you get to the end that you don't pull off the tail. That's going to act as our handle. And then once our prawns are peeled, we have to butterfly them, which is totally different than how we usually do it, because we normally make a cut about halfway in along the back here. But to butterfly shrimp, you have to go in the other side, okay, the underbelly. And we'll cut right down the length, but do not go through, especially on the end here. Okay, we want to cut through that flesh just down to the skin, so that the shrimp opens up, but is still attached in the center. So 1 down and 1,000 to go. Sorry, just had a catering flashback. And of course, once butterflied, if you see a vein and need to pull it out, go ahead. But anyway, let's try that one more time, even though I'm going to edit this one down. So instead of cutting into the back, we're going to cut into the underbelly, and we will slice that lengthwise, but again, do not go all the way through. And be especially careful when you're near the end. Okay, so go a little bit slow till you get the hang of it. And then once our shrimp are prepped and our crumbs are made, all the hard work is over. And it's probably obvious, but I'll tell you anyway, both those components can be prepped ahead of time, which is very much recommended. We can't be greeting guests with shrimp hands. So ideally, you're doing that earlier in the day. And then what we'll do once we do want to move into final production is line a sheet pan with foil And we'll give it a nice light brushing with some olive oil. And then once that's set, we will apply our crumb mixture to our prawns as shown. Okay, I like to press on a whole bunch to start, and then kind of shake that off, and then maybe reapply a little bit more. Because what we're shooting for here is the surface of that prawn is totally coated with crumbs, but just a nice light layer. We don't want it all piled up. Otherwise, the edges of those crumbs aren't going to crisp up in the oven. So we'll apply a very generous amount of crumbs, and then sort of let it fall off, applying more if necessary, until they are lightly but thoroughly coated. And once that's done, if you see a few spots that need a little extra, go ahead and give it a little extra pinch. And then once our prawns have been crumbed and panned, they are ready for the oven, in a very hot oven. So let's go ahead and transfer those into the center of a 475-degree oven for about 8 to 10 minutes or so, depends on the size, or until they're cooked through and looking something like this. Check it out. Hey, are those prawns done or just happy to see me? So yes, once cooked through, those tails should be standing straight up. And because we use such a hot oven, some of those crumbs should have crisped up nicely. So these are looking just about perfect. Except, for whatever reason, 1 out of every 12 does not assume the proper shape, and instead turns into what we call in the business a humpback prawn. And the frustrating thing is, nobody knows why this happens. I mean, scientists have been studying this for decades, and have absolutely no idea. So I'm going to go ahead and eat that one, after which I served up the rest next to some lemon aioli. And that's it. What I'm calling prawn Provencale is done. And of course, crispy, garlicky, herby breadcrumbs are good on almost everything. But when you combine it with the sweetness of that prawn, it is an absolutely perfect combination. And by the way, I know it drives some of you crazy when I double dip, but it's fine. My guests are in the other room. No one can see this. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling prawn Provencale. And sure, butterflying all those prawns does take a little bit of time, but I think the resulting appearance and taste is more than worth it. And they've been one of my go-to hot hors d'oeuvres for a long time. My only regret here is I didn't use a roasted red pepper aioli, which I think would have made for a more attractive presentation. But you know what? That's fine. Life's too short for regrets, especially in the kitchen. But anyway, I realize you're here for recipes, not for life coaching. So with that, let me finish up by saying I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.